If you'd like to resume, please, Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. So just to reiterate that although it's not in the report, officers do acknowledge that on the 21st of July 2020, elected members of this council approved a motion to oppose this development in Wisbech and for the Chief Executive to write to the Secretary of State to make clear the council's opposition to these plans. The strength of local feeling and concerns were further endorsed by the other three host authorities, also approving similar motions, so this information is already in the public domain. As a host authority, we're automatically considered as an interested party in the DCO process, and at this stage, we're required to submit relevant representations on the application to the Inspectorate no later than the 15th of November 2022. So the committee is asked to endorse the draft relevant representations document in Appendix 3, which has been prepared by technical officers from both Cambridgeshire County Council and Fenland District Council, noting that it will need to be updated to take account of the key specialist input that's still to be supplied. So in addition to Fenland District Council, lead officers are also working closely with the other two host authorities, Norfolk County Council and the Borough of Kings Lynn and West Norfolk, who will be submitting separate relevant representations to PINS. The draft relevant representation that's been prepared by technical officers is a precursor to the more detailed local impact report, which will follow at a later date and will set out the likely impacts of the proposal on the local area. So at this stage, the council's technical officers and consultants have reviewed the detail of Medworth CHP's application and provided their comments on what they've identified as the key issues and concerns that they have regarding the submission that they want to draw to the inspector's attention. These technical comments are intended as highlights or headlines that will provide the inspector with sufficient detail of what the council expects to include and expand upon in the fuller local impact report at a later stage of the inspectorate's examination of the DCO. These effectively create the hooks for us to expand upon moving forward. So at this stage, it's important that we have the key subject areas covered and the points of concern in there rather than all the fine detail. The key issues identified relate to concerns over some of the information and calculations contained in Medworth CHP's environmental statement and other application documents. These concerns include, but are not limited to, traffic and transport concerns regarding improvements needed to existing roads to accommodate construction and operational traffic, potential damage to the local road network, and the need for appropriate compensation. Also, inaccuracies in the figures presented with regards to potential climate change and health and wellbeing impacts. Concerns from our education colleagues regarding proximity to the Thomas Clarkson Academy and similar concerns from Fenland colleagues in relation to the wider schools not directly under County Council control and errors in air quality calculations. More information on this can be found in Appendix 3, along with other areas such as landscape and visual, historic environment, biodiversity, hydrology, major accidents and disasters, and waste availability and composition, which are also considered. However, as already emphasised, it is worth acknowledging that further technical submissions are still outstanding before we can finalise our response to PINS, and wider discussions with key consultees such as the Fire Service and also the middle level commissioners on behalf of the Internal Drainage Board are still taking place. In summary, the technical nature of the relevant representation response reflects our role as a host authority, which is to highlight to the inspector the key issues that will need consideration in the determination of the DCO before a decision is reached by the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It's also to provide the headline technical concerns that will be built upon in our local impact report, including details of the necessary mitigation and controls that would be required in the DCO to protect the environment and local residents in the event that the Secretary of State is minded to approve the application. If members wish to respond to the inspector, either as a local member on behalf of their residents or representative of a group, they can register as an interested party on the PINS website. But in terms of the relevant representations document, it's essential that we differentiate between the council's technical response and any political or interest group responses. Members are asked to endorse the draft relevant representations in Appendix 3 for submission to the Planning Inspectorate and to delegate to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee, the authority to finalise the technical officer responses and make changes to the themes within the relevant representations ahead of the deadline for submission to PINS on Tuesday, the 15th of November. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Deborah. Before I open up this item for debate. I'd like to invite Mrs. Virginia Buckner, who is here with members of the campaign group Wisbech Without Incineration, to present a number of public questions to the committee. If I could ask Virginia to come to the table, please. Good morning, Virginia. The limit for public questions or public contributions to the committee is 3 minutes. I'm aware that there are a large number of questions here, which in themselves, even without the answers, exceed the 3 minutes. But I am intending to take all the questions and answers, but I'm intending to do so at pace. So if people could be as rapid as possible in getting through this. They're important questions and it's an important matter, so I am intending to take it, but I would like this to be no longer than it need to be in order for the questions and answers to be covered. So I will take no supplementary questions, and members' questions I will reserve until we get to that point in the debate. So I'm going to ask Virginia, please, if you could read your first question, and then we'll go to the answer to that, and I will take each question and answer in turn.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to your committee today. I'm the campaign coordinator for Wiswin, a non-political group of those against the proposed mega incinerator, which is virtually everyone in Wisbech and the surrounding villages, as well as our local MP, Steve Barclay, and the Prime Minister, except for those with a pecuniary interest. I'd like to thank the Chair and Council Leader for coming and visiting the site. If you're not familiar with Wisbech, most people think the site is in some field outside of Wisbech and are quite shocked when they see that it is really part of our town. Now, in question 444 and 447, which I won't repeat, but they will be employing 40 people after the incinerator is built, whereas several food factories have stated they will have to close if that happens. And I really want to emphasize that. However, they talk about employing 700 staff to build, and that will also have an impact, because where would they even accommodate 700 people in our small town? But we're also equally concerned that they quote this 700 when that could be a meaningless figure. Is that somebody who makes the tea, or what does it mean? So we would like the council to try, if it's in their remit, to ascertain what that 700 represents in full-time hours.
Apologies, Virginia. I'm struggling to see. We've got a large number of questions. I was expecting you to read through the questions, and that's not in the way I have it. If you could just please read the questions in the order that they are, and then we'll.
The very first question is that it talks about 444 in the report, visual impact, and it says the assessment has concluded that there will be no significant landscape or townscape effects. And also in 447, once built, it will own, and also talks in 447 about hydrology and mentions about number of employees. And I'm asking if the council could get clarification from MVV of what that 700 means. Is it full-time equivalents?
Thank you. If officers could answer those first two questions. I have a written answer here. I don't know. I'm happy to read the answers out unless somebody else is prepared to do so. Yeah, who's going to read that out? Is that going to be Deborah? Yeah, Deborah, if you could take that on, please.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the 700 staff, the environmental statement chapter 3 under description of the proposed development in volume 6.2 at section 3.8.57 says that over the duration of the construction, there are likely to be around 700 construction personnel from a range of disciplines. During the peak periods of construction for all elements of the proposed development, there would be likely up to about 500 construction personnel present on site at any one time. And then it's anticipated that...
If we could just stop you for a moment. Could you
Please, would you hold your microphone a bit closer to you? Because I'm struggling. There's lots of air conditioning noise behind me and I'm finding it hard to hear. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. Is that better? So that's in terms of, just to summarise, 700 construction staff from a range of disciplines, up to 500 at a time, and then 40 full-time employees. What the applicant's environmental statement therefore does in each topic area is to effectively set out an assessment of the worst case scenario. And this text from chapter 3 highlights that those staff members would be at different phases of the build out if permission were to be granted rather than all at once. Nevertheless, it will be for PINS to consider all these pressures and the issues highlighted at both the construction and operational phases if the permission is granted. If members are happy for me to then move on or back to the query about the landscape effects and the concerns raised there, it's just to stress that the terminology in the report is from a technical standpoint, and our landscape and visual consultants advise that in terms of landscape effects, the guidelines for landscape and visual impact, referred to as GLVIA3, states that the landscape effects are effects on the landscape as a resource in its own right, and that the assessment of landscape effects deals with the change and development on the landscape as a resource. And the concern here is with how the proposal will affect the elements that make up the landscape. That's the aesthetic and perceptual aspects of the landscape and its distinctive character. So the visual effects are effects on specific views on the general visual amenity experienced by people. And an assessment of visual effects deals with the effects of change and development on the views available to people and the visual amenity. So what we're looking at is the townscape, which is defined as the character and composition of the built environment, including the buildings and the relationships between them, the different types of urban open space, including green spaces, and the relationship between buildings and open spaces. So the landscape and visual assessment found that there would be significant effects on the Wisbech Settled Fen landscape area. And when we're looking at the context, if you just bear with me one moment, about how to assess that harm, because it is a technical way of doing it. So I have to refer to the information that we've been provided. To ascertain the level of harm in terms of landscape and visual, you multiply the value of the receptor location, as in what's being affected, and its sensitivity by the magnitude of the change. So in terms of what's changing, the context is this is already an industrial estate. So because the proposed site is an industrial estate, the value or sensitivity of the location is slightly lowered, which means that the level of harm is also lowered. But the consultants also advised that he'll review the magnitude of change because it could be potentially revised with the applicant to becoming medium to low. And again, these are technical terms, rather than low to very low, which would increase the level of harm in terms of landscape and visual.
Thank you very much indeed. Virginia, would you like to ask your next question, please?
4.4.9 is the socio-economic, and food factories have stated to MVV they will have to close as they will not meet the hygiene requirements of their customers. One specific company's response was omitted by MVV when reporting to the planning inspectorate, for which they apologised after the deadline, as apparently it was a human error. Can CCC establish, if it's within their remit, the impact storage will have on the food factories surrounding the incinerator so that that can be included in their report?
So we are awaiting comments from our Fenton colleagues for the section of the report in relation to the food factories and the issues you've raised there, and it will include input from their environmental environmental health officers, but we would strongly recommend that the companies in question register as interested parties themselves with the inspectorate to ensure that their concerns are articulated. And in relation to the admission that you've advised of, Medworth CHP has apologised, that you say as Medworth has apologised for, this should be raised directly with PINS as it's more of a procedural matter. In terms of the impact that the storage would have on the food factories, the Environment Agency are the Pollution Control Authority, and so any impacts and necessary mitigation would need to be considered in the permit application, which the applicant is seeking to twin track with this DCO process. However, we will also ask our colleagues in public health and environmental health to again consider this and whether it's within their remit. And if it is, then they can add some high-level comments at this stage, which can be developed further in the local impact report.
Thank you very much. Virginia, next question.
The next one is 4.4.12 on the subject of education. The impact of the 4-year build is in a built-up area, and although I appreciate it's being classified as an industrial area, we're talking about industrial in a few yards away. It is not industrial, and I'm not sure whether the county or the advisors to county are aware that there's a huge number of another housing area is going to be built, which will be annexed to the incinerator. So that quite clearly changes the impact that it will have. So my question is, surely this assessment by the Environment Agency should be done prior to agreement of it going ahead, bearing in mind the schools and homes so close to the proposal. Sorry, I'll keep brief.
The Environment Agency is better placed to comment on this and suggest the correct assessments and any control measures. However, as we've said, the applicant is seeking to twin track the permit application. And so subject to the EA acceptance process, it might be possible for this to be considered at the same time. So we will feed this back to our EA colleagues. And in addition to this, we'll also discuss these concerns with environmental health colleagues and see if there's any controls or assessments within their remit that can be done in the interim. And if so, again, they can provide some high-level comments at this stage, which hopefully can be developed further in the local impact report.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Next question, Virginia.
The area on 5.4, they talk about following to ensure good practice, ensure an open and transparent decision-making process. Can we just ask if WISWIN can be included in the notification process, please?
If WISWIN or anyone else with an interest in the proposal is registered as an interested party, then PINS will advise them of any updates. However, when officers have updates for elected members about our technical responses, then we will get them into the public domain as early as we can.
Thank you. Next question.
7.3 on this, you see, I have read all the report, even though it's unbelievably technical. So the statutory, legal and risk implications, there has been a personal cost by residents and the campaign team in engaging with this application, as well as officer time in all the councils. However, we believe a significant cost was made in engaging an outside professional for a specific aspect by CCC for the Waterbeach proposal. And we would naturally expect, despite being aware of the difficult financial implications all councils are under, whether a budget consideration would also be given for Wisbeach.
Yep, we can confirm that specialist consultants have already been engaged to provide advice on matters such as air quality and landscape and visual assessments, and their initial comments are contained in the report. We've employed these where we do not have the relevant specialism within the County Council or Fenland District Council, and in some cases these are the same technical consultants we use for the Waterbeach proposal, so there's no difference to the way that we're resourcing this.
I just said fantastic. Item 7.6, local member involvement. PIN's guidance sets out the role of the local authority and officers will ensure that local members are kept informed at key stages. again, can I ask if Widening be included in such notifications, please?
Thank you. Yeah, as we said, when officers have updates for elected members about our technical responses, we'll get them in the public domain as early as we can.
Now, regarding the Newbridge Lane access in item 3.2, it states the principle of widening and extending of Newbridge Lane is acceptable. And further on, on 3.9, the existing carriageway of Newbridge Lane is unlikely to be of suitable construction, etc. The description of this small road, the word lane expresses it more accurately. The proposed access is immediately opposite the large Tesco store, who are also against this, and the lane is currently heavily used as far as it is accessible. It's only halfway is accessible and then it's pedestrian. However, as stated in the council's report, this disappears into a pedestrian path which is used locally, particularly by students from the Thomas Clarkson Academy, as a very safe shortcut from one side of Wisbech to homes near the other side. So I'm challenging that their access is wanting to be at an extremely busy area and a safe area for walking. As you know, Wisbech is a rural town with not that many pavements in areas, particularly around where they're proposing to build that. So I'm really challenging the access that they want to make in what is classified and recognised as a lane.
Thank you. So we've already had some input from our colleagues in transport assessment, rights of way and highway development management, but we will ask those colleagues to consider these points as part of their technical comments to feed into our relevant representations response wherever possible. And then we can expand upon our submission as part of the local impact report and engage further with the applicant on any concerns that are raised.
The next point is 3.13. The proposed DCO will require review by county council managers and legal representatives, etc. Criticisms of the lack of information are made throughout this section of the council's report, and this is shared by businesses and residents too. Whilst there was no comment in this part of the report with regard to traffic volumes to Newbridge Lane, the campaign team undertook a formal traffic survey. We were given training first and used all the proper equipment in a 12-hour period from 7 AM to 7 PM, identifying the already heavy use of the Cromwell Road by Newbridge Lane. However, this was done during COVID. During the normal summer months of the A47 by the Cromwell Road, it's very heavily used by visitors heading to the North Norfolk coast, including caravans. Getting an ambulance, I speak from personal experience, getting an ambulance to our main hospital in Kings Lynn during these summer holiday congestion periods is challenging, let alone when there will be an additional 360 daily lorry movements from the proposed incinerator site. So obviously I'm challenging the logic of using this lane for access to the site.
The proposal is being assessed by a number of technical colleagues, including the transport modelling assumptions that have been made by the applicant, but early discussions with the colleagues indicate that they would have no concerns about the impact of the proposed development, subject to the already proposed enhancements to Newbridge Lane and also the signalisation of the Cromwell Road Newbridge Lane junction. However, this will be expanded upon and added to in the relevant representation response in due course. The County Council has not yet received any comments from National Highways, although it is understood that they are also looking at the proposals and will send through their comments in due course.
Next one, 3.32. The application site is proposed to be serviced by 5 key routes. Well, Wisbech doesn't even virtually have a dual carriageway, but as above, but has consideration also been given, because we hear the quote of 360 lorry movements a day, but also there's going to be a proposed, as stated to us by MVV, 22 to 25% of additional sealed lorries leaving the site to remove the toxic ash. So has that additional element been looked at by the council?
So in terms of what's leaving the site, the environmental statement, chapter 3, under the description of the proposed development, sets out the incinerator bottom ash, or IBA, and the APC, which is air pollution control residues, and the amount of those and how they will be transported from the site. Obviously, the applicant doesn't use the term toxic. That's not within the application itself. These are specific technical terms with regard to the IBA and the APC, and we're not sure where the 22 to 25% figure has come from. However, the APC residues amount to approximately 5% of the total waste by volume, and I'll just look at what the IBA comes out. We may need to come back to you with further information on what the IBA comes out at in percentage, but both the IBA and APC movements have been factored into the environmental statement and therefore assessed as part of the proposals. 26.5%.
Question then, Virginia, please.
So 26% is of bottom ash. 0.3.33 and the discussion on Newbridge Lane. We appreciate the report has recognised, sorry, I'll have to read it out, I was trying to be brief. Whilst the proposal is to create a new access from the Newbridge Lane, a significant amount of the non-HGV traffic will be using the existing road network, passing the Thomas Clarkson Academy site, and also in close proximity to the Cambion Education Foundation Centre and the Riverside Meadows Academy school locations. Therefore, this will potentially have a huge impact on all these schools, particularly during peak times, drop-off and pick-up times. And to not acknowledge the location of these schools is a concern. We appreciate the report has recognised this, and this is a major concern to parents with children at the 3 schools in the immediate area. This area is already challenging, with many lorries going from Wiesnam Lane, where the schools are located, into Algores Way already, 1 child being killed by a lorry in the last few years. Additionally, it would appear that due to the fen soil, Wiesnam Lane has had the road collapse several times recently, and has significant consideration being given to this.
Highways colleagues are aware of the fen soil and implications that this has on the construction and maintenance elements of roads in the area, which is why they're seeking to ensure that if permission is granted, there's sufficient infrastructure and commuted sums being secured to ensure that it's delivered effectively.
3.34, referring to above and highlighted in this particular paragraph, is the council aware this is also the route to the many businesses along Algores Way and the huge trucks that go down there already, and it is not unusual for a queue of cars along Algores Way to enter the recycling centre. So the chaos that this would occur even during the construction would be incredible.
Highways colleagues are aware of the commercial nature of the area and the potential for queuing cars on the highway when the household recycling centre needs to close briefly to allow for skip changes, etc.
4.4, The baseline assessment has used noise monitoring data from November 2021, which is within the COVID-19 lockdown period, and therefore it should not be considered a true representation of baseline noise levels. Absolutely. A great deal of MVV's work was done during COVID, not least during the consultation period, where few people were really prepared to attend. Now, can anyone explain to Wisbech residents, because nobody really understands, how adequate consultation can be considered acceptable to the planning inspectorate? I realise that's a difficult question here, but equally, given that Wisbech has around 30% residents from Eastern Europe, there was no explanation whatsoever in any other language. So we're challenging even why the planning inspectorate could even accept this, given that all the alleged consultation was done during COVID, and certainly 30% of residents were excluded from this.
We can't comment on the process that's been undertaken by PINS, which includes the acceptance of the proposal, but we would again encourage interested parties to raise these issues with PINS themselves. And then in terms of the technical methodologies that were agreed, these were agreed during the pre-application stage, and they did take account of adjustments required to account for any known anomalies that existed through COVID. So this has already been considered by technical officers, and it will be assessed by PINS before a decision is reached.
Quite. 5.6 and 5.7 talks about odour concentration. It's extremely technical, and officers have recognised that the odour release rate appears to be incorrect. But does this refer or include the proposed 11 days of storage that MVV want, which is a major concern of the food factories and residents in the surrounding area?
We can check this with our air quality consultant, but suggests that it does include the whole proposal and the design features for the storage of waste. However, any storage of waste would only be proposed within the building which the EA permit would seek to control through the use of negative air pressure. So this should not pose an unacceptable risk, but we will nonetheless draw these concerns to the attention of both the EA and our environmental health colleagues for their awareness.
.2 about useful energy, the maximum parameters, the main building, etc. They talk about the height and the length. The maximum parameters at two chimneys are 90 metres. Please note, when we directly raised this with the managing director, personally, he stated that the chimneys would be higher than 90 metres to allow for a larger concrete platform to be built to mitigate issues when building on this floodplain. Has this been recognised by the council with regard to its responses?
In the description of the proposed development in volume 6.2 of chapter 3 of the application, section 3.4.2 states that all heights are referenced from the finished floor level, or FFL, i.e. 0 metres. So unless otherwise stated, the finished floor level for the purposes of this is set at 3 metres above ordnance datum. There are figures within the application submission that goes into that in more detail. The parameters for the assessment state that at 3.4.91, maximum dimensions that have been assumed for particularly key components of the energy from waste CHP facility are set out in table 3.1 and illustrated in various figures. These are all listed, and the key components are required to accommodate the detailed design phase and any consequential adjustments to buildings or structures dimensions or any ancillary roof mounted equipment and enclosures for these. So it looks like the environmental statement says that they will allow for minor variations, but these have been taken into account across the landscape and visual impact assessments, where it's stated at paragraph 9.4.5 about the zones of theoretical visibility that were produced for the preliminary environmental impact report, and they've been calculated using the revised height data for key buildings, structures and chimneys at the Energy from Waste CHP facility. The zones of theoretical visibility were produced to show the limits and to take account of any changes. I can go through the list of figures if Chair would like me to read that.
I think they will be published, and I'm not sure that it's going to help much to go through such a list at this moment, but if we can keep to the principle of the argument.
So what it basically means is that there's a 3 metre finished floor level across the site, and then an up to 90 metres above the finished floor level chimney on top. And that these are the parameters that have been used to generate the zones of theoretical visibility for the assessments.
6.7, the consultant's assessment has concluded there will be no significant landscape or townscape effects. I can absolutely say that this has caused quite a lot of concern with residents, and we could not disagree more with this opinion. Wisbech in Finland is flat. We have 266 listed buildings, including 3 grade 1 within the town, just a few minutes from the site. The 2 chimneys, as we've constantly said, will be higher than Ely Cathedral. MVV advised they will require to build the concrete base higher to mitigate the building on a floodplain. Surely, therefore, the consultant's comments are not an assessment, but more of a conjecture. We would ask councillors and officers to go online, type in Mannheim incinerator, and see the impact on that city of the MVV building, which has a population 10 times bigger than Wisbech, 350,000, and they want to build a similar incinerator in our small town. Just type in Mannheim incinerator, and I think councillors and officers will be horrified by it. So we would ask that that conjecture is reviewed.
Just to come back to the fact that these are technical comments that are made from a landscape and visual perspective in terms of the significance and how that's calculated. However, the heritage impact assessment comments we hope will be added by Fenland District Council colleagues in due course, and they'll view that in terms of the historic landscape setting and perspective.
6.8, still under the landscape and visual assessment in chapter 9, where it says that the Thomas Clarkson Academy would experience a very low or low magnitude of change. It's a bit of a reiteration, but this is at odds with the transport section on noise and pollution. Environmentally, this incinerator will be surrounded on 3 sides by residential properties as well as the local schools. This is not in a field out of town, but is surrounded by properties and schools in the town of Wisbech. We would therefore ask the comments to be amended to more accurately reflect the impact this will have on local residents and schools.
The site is immediately surrounded by industrial and commercial uses, with the nearest existing residential property, 10 Newbridge Lane, being located approximately 30 metres south of the boundary of the proposed facility and approximately 190 metres south of the chimneys and the main building. The Thomas Clarkson Academy is located approximately 1.2 kilometres northeast of the site. And so coming back again to the terminology, the landscape and visual impact assessment methodology sets out how you define low and very low visual magnitude of change. Low being a noticeable or small change affecting a limited part of the view that may obliquely be viewed or partly screened and or appearing in the background of the view. And this category may include rapidly changing views experienced from fast moving road vehicles or trains. Very low would be a small or negligible change to the view that may be obliquely viewed and most screened and or appearing in the distant background or viewed at high speed over short periods and capable of being missed by the casual observer. There's further information in Appendix 9B, 10 and 16 of the Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment chapter of the environmental statement, which can help explain this further.
May I just query, the word trains was mentioned. We don't have a train in 30 miles away. I think 40 miles away might be the nearest station. So perhaps this was written by specialists who hadn't actually visited the site, but I just raised that.
No, I think that's a definition in general terms for any site anywhere.
Yes,
it doesn't
sure.
specifically refer to.
But we would love
to
a train.
Wisbech,
We
but
would love a train station.
If we can press on, that would be good. Thank you.
7.5, it refers to Fenland District Council's Conservation Officer will provide comments. I was somewhat concerned that there hadn't been any provision yet, comments. And as we've mentioned, we have 266 listed buildings, including 3 grade 1. The 2 chimneys will be higher than Ely Cathedral, and the incinerator itself will be a huge, as we personally think, visually imposing blot on the surrounding properties. Can Cambridge County Council advise when they expect a comprehensive report from Fenland District Council?
Colleagues at Fenland District Council are aware of the urgency of this and will be providing comments on the heritage matters in advance of our deadline on the 15th of November. However, it's likely that the real detail will follow for the local impact report. So the initial response that we are proposing to put forward by the 15th of November will in effect act as a hook to highlight the concern for the inspector, with the much more detailed comments to follow.
On the hydrology on chapter 12, no mention has been made of building on this floodplain, and unclear, well, I didn't see it, and unclear, and no mention of liaison with the relevant drainage boards. Can we have clarification on this, please?
We've been in discussion with the lead officer at the middle level commissioners on behalf of the Internal Drainage Board, and whilst they are likely to register as an interested party in their own right, as their remit is very different to our own local lead flood authority, will look to add their high level comments to our relevant representations response in a similar way to what we're trying to do with the fire service for Cambridgeshire, to ensure that we're working together with our partner authorities as much as possible.
10.5 and 10.6, and I just want to re-emphasize the scale that quoted in the report, that we all know the scale of the emissions is huge. Fenland is known as the breadbasket of England. Our farmers are equally concerned about the emissions. There appears little mention of the polluting impact this incinerator will have on the surrounding fields. Is this outside the council's remit?
We would strongly recommend that the local farmers in question register as an interested party with the inspectorate to ensure that their concerns are articulated. Agricultural matters are covered by Natural England, and emission control is covered by the Environment Agency. So other than the comments provided by our air quality consultant and our colleagues in public health and environmental health, this would need to be covered by the lead government agencies.
For the council's information, there is a proposal to build an incinerator in Boston by the docks. As you know, that's less than 30 miles away. It's included carbon capture, whereas the Wisbech one doesn't. It was due for a decision by the Secretary of State by the 6th of October. This has been deferred, presumably because of the new cabinet, but we just raised that so that in case you weren't aware. On the issue of chapter 12 and 12.1, Wisbech already has a higher than the national average of residents with asthma. The town is below sea level. Would the council please give consideration to providing further data in this regard, working with the NHS?
We can certainly discuss this with our colleagues in public health, who already work closely with the NHS and have already referenced data sets that they would expect the applicant to use.
I won't repeat what we've got on chat item 14 because you've already responded adequately for that. So I'll just thank the council for allowing us to raise all these questions with you.
Thank you very much indeed, Virginia, and thank you, Deborah, for answering those questions so fully. And I hope, Virginia, you'll be pleased to see that already in some of the answers there are proposals to revisit some of the elements of the relevant representation draft that we have in front of us. So thank you for helping effect that change. Members, do you have any questions of clarification for Mrs. Bucknell? Clarification from Councillor Tierney.
Thank you. I'm going to have quite a bit to say when we get to the debate, but I'd like to, if Mrs. Bucknell wouldn't mind, just use her a little to bring out a little bit more information so that I don't have to do a wall of words later. So first of all, can I just say that I agree with every word she said? I'm the local member for the area, and there's nothing that has just been said that I don't 100% agree with. I'd just like to bring out a little bit, Mrs. Bucknell, you said about the food factories employing hundreds of people and how they might potentially leave because of this development. I don't think other people who don't live in Wisbech understand how much of an effect that will have on the town. I wonder if you could just expand a little bit on how important food production is and how many people it employs and what effect it might have on our economic environment in Wisbech.
Several companies have personally said directly to us that they will have to close. This is not conjecture. It's that they would not meet their customers' standards, and particularly because of the 11 days of storage. Can you imagine 11 days of storage, 300, well, if you halve the 340 lorries going in to deposit their waste, and times that by 11, the thought doesn't bear thinking. We have had several food factories tell us they will have to close, not conjecture. Wisbech is a primary employed, people in Wisbech primarily are employed in the food factories surrounding Wisbech, not just Spillers, many factories all around there. Most have said to us, including Nestle, including Lamb Weston, another big employer, they will not accept the steam generated. So I don't know if their minds have been changed in the last few weeks because of the cost, but they had said to us that one of the reasons for MVV wishing to go and locate at that site is because they plan to sell the steam to the factories, and the factories do not want it because they do not want that incinerator in Wisbech because it will damage their businesses. So I can't tell you numbers. I think you'd Councillor Tierney, you'd probably know more than me about the numbers of staff in all the factories, but we are talking hundreds.
Question of clarification. All right, any more questions of clarification? Councillor Ferguson and then Councillor Bradnam.
So I'm really interested in this issue with the food companies. What is their specific complaint? Is it the storage of waste on the site, or is it emissions from the chimney stacks?
They've advised us that it's storage because obviously with 11 days times that amount of waste going in, that will create rats. We've got dikes all around. You have the imagination anyway, and they have formally said to us that because of that, with regard to air pollution, because the Environment Agency say that they cannot measure the amount of pollutants because especially I think it's PCBs are too small to measure. They don't measure them and so can't give figures. But in many other incinerator proposals, that's being raised, and they're finding that the air pollution has gone into children, their nails, animals, chickens, eggs, etc. So the pollution is a factor, but the Environment Agency don't give a figure against it, which can be quite frustrating when you're trying to argue against it.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. clarification.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question was rather similar to Councillor Ferguson's, which was, I was wondering what particularly was it that they were concerned about with regard to pollution, because clearly the permitting by the Environment Agency would set the standards for that. And I do believe that they do now monitor the particulate material as well as many of the other ingredients of the emissions. So I'm just trying to work out on what basis the food companies are saying that they would have to close. It's not clear to me that that's a natural consequence.
If I can reply, the Environment Agency don't measure, because they say they currently can't, the amount of I think it's PCBs. It's one of those acronyms with 3 initials. I can't remember, but it's been evidenced all over Europe as well as in incinerators in the UK about the damage in chickens, in children, etc. But for the companies, they are saying that their businesses, their customers will not accept it. So I can only go on what their views are and what their standards are. And obviously they've got terms of reference with their customers, and their customers are saying that that would not be acceptable to be surrounded by an incinerator dumping 11 days of waste times 160 vehicles a day. Also, as has been mentioned by officers here, we talk about the bottom ash, which is carcinogenic, which I appreciate you'll all be aware of. That has to be taken away in sealed containers. That is so dangerous. So in a small town where its very survival is based on the farms and the factories surrounding it, the impact will be just quite catastrophic. I think the company saw a space on the map where there was no incinerator. I think that's how it started, and they decided to go there. They didn't even realise in the first instance that it was a floodplain until we raised it with them. So we're dealing with challenges on why they decided to even choose Wisbech.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see any more questions of clarifications, so thank you very much indeed, Virginia. If you've not already received a written copy of the responses with a little bit of amplification and more figures, then that will be sent to you, and I will ensure also that it'll be included within the minutes, but that you should receive that within the next 10 days. So thank you very much for addressing us. The next part of this item is to ask Councillor Tierney whether you would like to speak as the local member. So this is your opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, of course I would. So I've made a few notes from the discussion following Mrs. Buckner's comments, and I'll raise them and then make a wider point at the end. So first of all, there was some talk about visual effects and how much effect it would have. And at the beginning, we said, well, yes, it's some, but we haven't said it's the maximum. And then later on, there was a comment that perhaps there will be none from a technical perspective. And I think this highlights the danger of looking at things like this from a technical report, because it's crazy to say he'll have no visual effect. It is gigantic. It is on the entrance to town. It is a huge pair of chimneys and a massive construction, which will cast a black shadow over the entire town. There's no getting around it. There's no way of avoiding it. The idea that it won't have a visual impact is laughable. Anyone who says that, I just come visit. It's crazy to think that. Of course, it will have a visual impact. It'll have a permanent visual impact forever on a town that already has challenges and does not deserve this. So I've got to challenge that openly. Then we talked about the distance to the school, and the officer response, well, no, it's quite away. It's 1.2 kilometres away. That's not a long way. That's 3 times around the school running track. That is right underneath. It's virtually the doorstep of the incinerator. There's no distance involved there. That's next to it. the idea that it's surrounded on 3 sides by industrial areas. Look, it's my ward. There's houses all over the place there. The idea that there are not houses nearby and it's all factories is absolute nonsense. And anyone who visits it can see that quite quickly, including the one that was, what, 30 metres away? I mean, that's a house. They live 30 metres away. Let's not pretend they don't exist. In regards to the access for the lorries, of course, that's a lot of lorries. Now, I accept that roads can handle more lorries during the day. And if you average it over the hours, you could make an argument that probably the road will handle that. But that would be a misunderstanding of the nature of that junction, which is a very busy junction with a series of traffic lights that already often grind traffic to a standstill. For lorries to get into there, they would have to completely change that junction. I suspect they would include a new set of traffic lights. You really don't need traffic lights and then 30 metres later another set of traffic lights. It's crazy. This is the main access and exit from the town, or one of 2. So the idea that we can just chalk it up with lorries and new roadways is madness. Come and have a look. Come and see it. You'll quickly see that it's a crazy idea. The New Bridge Lane itself was previously closed. It used to be a throughway to the industrial area. They closed it because, well, a number of reasons, but primarily because residents said they didn't want all this traffic using it as a shortcut. And it's been closed successfully for some time. Now, I don't know whether they will eventually completely reopen it if this were to go ahead, which I hope it doesn't, or whether they would just create some massive turning bays and ferret people in and out the same exit. Whatever solution they come up with is going to cause the same problems and cause the same upset for local people. In regards to the consultation by MVV about the incinerator, absolutely correct from Mrs. Buckner. They've acted in bad faith, in my opinion, throughout this process. To hold their consultations during lockdown and COVID and to stretch them out over a whole day so that people couldn't protest at a specific period, so the strength of local opinion couldn't be shown to them, so they could kind of drag it out. The way that they've acted, absolute bad faith, and I've been disgusted by it, if I'm honest. Thank you very much to the officer for mentioning my motion, which you would not have known existed, I think, had it not been mentioned, because it certainly isn't mentioned in the report. And I'm very disappointed in that, because this is what I'm talking about with technical reports. In that background, there absolutely should have been a point that said that this council agreed to oppose this incinerator in every way that it can. We committed to that as a council. We agreed it was a cross-party opinion. It wasn't a political thing. We broadly all agreed that we would oppose it. It was accepted by council, and it should be stated in everything we write, because it's fundamental. We have agreed that we will oppose it, not talk about it and talk about, well, it might go ahead, so if it does, we'll mitigate this and that. No, we are opposed to it. It should be clear. People should read these reports and not think, well, maybe they're in favour. We're not in favour of it. We don't want it. And not just county council, also district council, also town council, also the MP, every council, and not just my Conservative Party, but every party that I'm aware of is equally opposed to this. This is as cross an opinion as you can get. And I don't think it's anywhere near clear enough. Now, I accept this should have been a technical report. That's fine. But there needs to be some emotion in this report, because it's not just technical, is it? It's a matter that will affect our town forever, and to which this council has committed to oppose. And that should be much, much clearer. So that's pretty much everything I've got to say. See if I've missed anything. No, that's all my notes. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Tierney. I'm now going to open this to initially questions to the officers. Does anybody have any questions to the officers? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask the officer whether this plant would be required to meet the new stringent BAT-C regulations. Thank you.
Emma, I think you can.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be easier if I pick that up. So effectively, the Environment Agency will set specific requirements, which will include best available techniques. So the simple answer is yes, but the precise detail will be based on the type of facility that it is. So we are liaising with the Environment Agency as part of our conversations and preparing the relevant representations. We're aware that the applicant has also put in their permit application and subject to that being received and validated by the Environment Agency, there's a strong possibility that we can look at twin tracking. The benefit of twin tracking is it gives both the inspectorate but also the local residents all of the information in the public domain at the same time. So that's something that we will be trying to assist with wherever possible.
Thank you. Any other questions for officers? Councillor Smith. Councillor Smith first. I saw you first. I'm calling you first.
Sorry?
You first. I'm
No, that's
calling
fine.
you first.
Right. Can I just check that in no way this is going to come to the planning committee here?
I can definitely confirm it won't be coming to the
All
planning
right.
committee.
So basically, okay. I agree entirely with I know Wisbech quite well. I've been there quite a lot. Lovely area. I agree with the comments made by the presenter and made by Councillor Tierney as well. There's a few things like the food factories, you know, them having to close down, etc. That's quite a concern. The impacts on the agricultural land, that's also a concern. I don't know if I have to declare an interest because I assume the county council owns land in that area. But also with regards to the motion by Councillor Tierney, why is that not in the report? But the actual impacts, and also if I can mention about the EA, I know there's always permits and everything in place, but equally it does seem like sometimes residents have to sort of go through a lot of issues before anything is taken notice of, which I do know about personally. So you can understand residents being concerned and wondering where things will actually be measured. I just think we're not making enough of a few things, and like the actual area of where it is, you know, it is an industrial estate, but it is near houses. It's near the town. It's not that far from the town, actually, is it? It's not that far from the town. It's not just an isolated industrial estate. I did actually wonder at one time whether we should put Google Maps up. So as people, there you go. Thank you. Can we put Google Maps up so as people who don't know the area, would that be a good idea? Just to sort of highlight where it actually is. Because it's not an isolated little industrial estate.
I'm not sure whether we're able to do that technically at the moment. But yes, I certainly recommend that people visit it on Google Maps and secondly, even preferably visit it in person as I have. So yes, I would certainly agree with that. Sorry, I'm trying to pick a question out of there, Councillor Smith.
I suppose there's a lot really. It's basically, are we making enough of the fact there will be a visual impact? I know that, and you know, from my experience. So are we making enough of that? What about the motion from Councillor Tierney? Why is that not mentioned in the report, as it seems to have so much cross-party support? So it's just a couple of things like that. Sorry, I know I went on a bit, but you know,
there's two questions in there.
Yeah.
So Emma will take those.
Okay, I've actually got three, so let's just see if
I
if
can
I can answer
understand
them.
why
Yeah.
residents are concerned.
Exactly. If we start with motion, I think Councillor Tierney would be amazed if I forgot the motion that we talked about and we went through right at the beginning of lockdown, and it was one of the first committees that we did virtually as well. So please be assured that that's ingrained in my mind. That definitely hasn't been lost at all. The reason why it's not in the paper is because this is going to be a technical response to the inspectorate raising the high kind of levels. So if we take our minds back to the Sonica application that we looked at and the relevant reps for that also was a motion that went through, Councillor Goldsack put that one through, full council, that was fully supported and endorsed. That also wasn't mentioned within our technical response, because what we do is through those responses, we went back to the Secretary of State, and in both instances, we wrote to the Secretary of State with our views. That said, we can put something in to say that members of the Environment and Green Investment Committee have serious concerns. In particular, they want PIN's attention drawn to the fact there was a motion, and we can quote exactly the date in 2020 we did that. So I can solve that one quite easily, but it's just to explain why it wasn't in there, and it wasn't in the Sonica response either. The landscape and the visual, I think I've got various documents open, but I think that the key that I would say is that at no point is our technical expert saying that there isn't a visual impact. What they've tried to do is be very clear on what guidance and what it is that the planning inspectorate will look at. And in the case of the landscape and visual impact assessment, there would be significant effects. The problem we've got here is that when you're looking at environmental impact assessment development, there are clear definitions. And one thing I'll say is anyone in the room, and I'm looking to Councillor Bradnam in particular, that was involved in the water beach application that went through, and the appeal that we did, we had exactly the same consultants working on that. And what they did is they went out, and I can assure you they will have visited the area and they've gone out onto all the rights of ways, etc., to be ensuring that the zones of influence have been looked at in great detail. And one of the things that will be in the written response that I'm not sure was read out or not is that goes for 17 kilometres, and you can see that there are elements that are seen. So just picking up on something Virginia said as well, the trains, we agree that was a definition, but actually this is something that will be seen from a vast distance, in particular the chimneys. So that's something that's picked up. Finally, in terms of the EA permit, although the permitting elements of it will be dealt with by the Environment Agency, as I know you'll be aware, Councillor Smith, when we looked at the Water Beach one, what we said was if permission was granted, we would want a number of conditions. This would be something that we'll be looking at in more detail under the Development Consent Order for this one at the same time. And as part of that, there would be elements that we would also be looking to control if indeed it was granted permission. You have to remember the County Council is not the determining authority, but we will make clear that if PINs were minded and the Secretary of State were minded to grant this permission, there would need to be serious controls in place. And whilst we can't duplicate those environmental controls, and it's clear within national guidance that we shouldn't duplicate those regulatory controls, there will be elements that we would still be seeking, of which there would be real-time information. And there were things that we set up. We'd be looking to use very, very similar controls that we looked at when we looked at Water Beach. So please be assured all of this detail will be in there. I suppose the key points to make here is what's been published today is a very early version. We're still talking to all of the key people, and you will have heard that we're including people like mid-level commissioners as well. So there are various elements still to come in. And in the case of landscape, that will include the heritage setting as well. So please take my reassurance that we are still working this up. This is still a document. It's quite long already, but it's still a document in progress, and we're still working with key partners. So hopefully that answers all three questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. Councillor Hathorn.
Just to clarify, so there's a space for a political response and a space for a technical report, or what? Or yeah.
No, so what we need to do is we need to keep politics out of it. And I think when we went to the meet up with the action group and we went out on site, what we need to differentiate is between the politics of this and also the technical side of things. So what we're saying is, if, for example, Councillor Tierney or the other local members within that red line area want to register, we would actively encourage that, so long as they are clear that who they are representing. So in their case, they would be representing their local residents or a particular group or a particular stance. What we need to do as the County Council is to be able to defend everything that we do. So the way that I can get around some elements of that is to say that members of the Environment and Green Investment Committee had concerns, or we want to draw attention to the fact that there was a motion that was passed by the council. But it's very, very clear that we need to differentiate between the two. We need to be able to defend in the same way as we would with our own planning decisions, which is why Councillor Smith was right to ask me the question. We need to be able to defend any views that we do. And that's why we've engaged really good technical consultants where we haven't got that in-house or Fenland District Council experience.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tierney, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. So I understand what you're saying about it needing to be technical and avoiding small p politics. But when we set a motion at full council, that sets the policy for this council. And the motion was that we would do everything we could to oppose this incinerator. That's just a fact. So it should be stated very clearly. We shouldn't have to just say it's the opinion of this committee. It should be stated very clearly in every policy document where there's a background that this council has passed a motion that sets our policy to oppose this incinerator. Because I think words matter. And I think the public read this, and when they read a document like this, it should be obvious to them what our position is, if we've set a policy as we have in this instance. Otherwise, what's the point of the whole democratic process? What's the point of motions? So I would say that. I would also add that we should, in any background, also add that the district and town councils of the area have also passed motions opposing it, because it's relevant background. We talk about other third parties, so why not? And then finally, I'd just ask if we could put the link to register as an interested party on the County Council website, because the more people see it in more places, the better. And yes, I have already done so. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't have a problem making reference to the motion, and I can say as part of that excluded members and substitutes of the planning committee, which I know was why Councillor Smith asked me the question that she did. I can also make reference to that letter that was done by Gillian Beasley as well, so we can provide copies. In relation to our website, the website is already updated to give everyone the signposting to the Planning Inspectorate website, so that's already on there. And we're clear about the dates, because one thing I'd like to come out of today is to actively encourage as many people, including some of those businesses that Virginia was talking about earlier, to register in their own right, because I think it is important that people understand if they don't register by the 15th of November, then there's every likelihood that the Planning Inspectorate won't let them speak or engage within that process. And I think it is important, as you've said, that everyone's views come in. When it comes back to what we're delivering, though, we have to be able to defend what we're putting forward. So we are, as part of your motion, I think it said take every legal step that we can do. We are already going out to get that legal representation, and we are looking to share that with colleagues at Fenland District Council. So that's being discussed at the moment, because what we're also keen to do is to be mindful to the public purse as well. So where we are able to share and work together, and also discussing with Norfolk colleagues as well, the ability to do a joint local impact report in the same way as we've done with Suffolk for the Sunlicker motion, that has to be in the interests of everyone locally as well.
Thank you. Councillor Coates and then Councillor.
Just a very simple question for officers, which I suspect it may be too early for you to answer, but I think we're all aware that there's been signalled from central government a loosening of planning controls and a speeding up of things. Do you have any indication of how that change yet might impact this as other applications?
Early indication would suggest it won't impact on this one, but if I hear anything different, I'll of course let you know.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely sympathise with what Councillor Tierney says, and I'm also distantly familiar with Wisbech for other reasons than this council. But what I'm noting is that what Emma Fitch has told us is that this response needs to provide the hooks to which further detail can be on which further detail can be hung at later stages. And I think actually our officers have done a very good job of covering all of the aspects of this application, which clearly do cause the residents concern. And also thank you to, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but Virginia, for your helpful consolidation of your questions. I think it was very helpful and useful for us to hear those and the answers today. So I think this response is picking up all the concerns that I personally had when reading through this application. Thank you.
I think Councillor Bradnam has moved us on from question time into debate, so there will be no more questions. So does anybody have anything that they wish to say before I move to the vote? Councillor Ray.
I think Virginia and Councillor Tierney have made the argument for not building the incinerator in that site very eloquently, and I agree with pretty much everything that they've said. That being said, I'm also very pleased to some extent to see the point made that the very slight greenhouse gas emission advantage that is made in this application depends entirely on the basis that you're basically burning dirty fuel to generate electricity. The only reason that becomes greenhouse gas negative is that the emissions from household waste emit methane when they are composted anaerobically. And what we have here is we're embedding a facility which encourages people to create more of that waste rather than addressing the real problem, which is why is there organic waste in household waste? Because it's that food waste in our bins that is generating methane, which is a much more damaging gas than CO2. So the purpose of the incinerator is just turning methane into CO2, which is slightly less damaging. So the real thing that this big facility, which will just encourage more waste, shouldn't be built, because we should be addressing the real problem of recycling our waste, excluding food waste from black bins. And that, I think, will come in and make this whole facility completely unnecessary in the fullness of time. So I'd like to see the specific arguments, which are made quite well in 10.6, 10.7 and 10.8, really explicitly in terms of the numbers, that the whole viability of this comes from food waste in black bin.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing anyone else indicating to speak, so I'm going to then move to the recommendations here in front of us. The recommendations are that we endorse the draft relevant representations in Appendix 3 for submission to the Planning Inspectorate, and that we delegate to the Executive Director, Place and Sustainability, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Committee, the authority to finalise the technical officer responses and make changes to the themes within the relevant representations. I'm looking to my Vice Chair to second that. Thank you very much indeed. Members, you've heard that this is the first of 3 different sets of submissions that we will be making on this matter. So this is the initial technical response that covers the areas that we will be asking the planning inspectors to consider during their assessment of this proposal. This does give scope for the draft response to be amended by officers in consultation with Councillor Gay and myself, and you've already heard in some of the responses to Mrs. Buckner and Wisbeach without incineration that there are already commitments made in there to address some of the issues within that report. So thank you very much indeed for that. And also we've heard that there will be the opportunity to include, and I certainly have no objection to this, a reference to this committee's concerns in light of the motion that was agreed by the council. So we will take upon ourselves the responsibility of joining with officers in finalising this response in the light of what we've heard today and the very useful questions and debate. So I'd like to put this now to the vote. Can I see those in favour of the proposal, please? I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members, for your questions and comments, and thank you very much, Mrs. Buckner and Wisbeach Without Incineration, for your contribution to today. Thank you very much, and thank you, officers, also. I'm moving on now to item 5, and I'm very much hoping that we can do this before the required constitutional break, which we must take after 2 hours, i.e. before 12 noon. So the next item, item 5, is the school's low carbon heating programme, first year's experience. We have with us Chris Parkin, who is the council's community energy manager, to present this report to us.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, technology problems as ever. Engi committee agreed a new funding model for low carbon heating projects at maintained schools in July of last year. And the key elements of that funding model were a combination of funding from grant funding from the public sector decarbonisation scheme, a capital contribution from the council's decarbonisation fund in recognition of the carbon savings the projects deliver, a capital contribution equivalent to the like-for-like costs of replacing existing end-of-life boilers with like-for-like boilers, and a loan, repayable loan, but made at the council's own borrowing cost. The paper's reporting on the first 15 months of experience on that programme. The status of the projects that we have at the moment are we have 3 schools that are currently still in installation works from the first phase of funding. We have £1.15 million of grant funding that we secured under phase 3 of the PSDS grant scheme. And that covers 9 schools, 5 of which have now accepted, 4 of which have now accepted investment grade proposals for installation of low carbon heating and associated measures, and are moving into works at the Christmas break. And a further 4, we're currently expecting those investment grade proposals to be finalised next month. Hot off the press, the phase 3B of the grant scheme was launched yesterday, and we submitted 4 grant applications yesterday for a further 13 schools, totaling around £2.3 million of grant funding. And we also submitted an application on behalf of an academy trust for 2 further schools, although that sits slightly outside of this programme because the funding arrangements are different. Looking at how grant criteria have evolved across the phases of the grant scheme, we found that applications have become more demanding in terms of the weight of supporting evidence required at each phase. And I think it's probably fair to say that our contractors are delivering very good value for us, and in practice taking a significant amount of cost at their own risk in developing those grant applications for us. The phase 3B grant criteria in particular place a particular emphasis on building fabric upgrades, so insulation improvements to enable low temperature heat pumps, which are less energy intensive to operate and therefore cheaper to operate. That's an area where we've got less experience on the school retrofit programme, and our contractors one of our contractors has brought on a subcontractor to help assess fabric upgrade potentials for those phase 3B grant applications. Unfortunately, neither contractor has found any cost-effective insulation upgrade potential for inclusion in the phase 3B applications, and that may well affect our success rates at phase 3B, although I suspect other applicants will face exactly the same challenges. Looking at the funding breakdown that we've achieved across the first 12 projects where we have secured grant funding, around 50% of the total cost is coming from grant funding. And that effectively is capped by the carbon threshold in the grant criteria. So you're only allowed £325 of grant for each tonne of CO2 saved. Around just under 20% of funding has come from the decarbonisation fund, and the balance of funding split relatively evenly between the loan element and the boiler like-for-like contribution that comes from our education capital colleagues and the funding that they receive from DFE. Carbon savings on the first 12 projects, they'll save around 4,000 tonnes over 20 years. which is a 60% reduction in site CO2 emissions. Looking at lessons we've learned from the development phase of the project, so up to finalisation of investment grade proposal, we found that it's taken a lot longer than expected to finalise outline business cases and then investment grade proposals and get school agreements. And that means that we've critically at both phase 2 and phase 3A missed the opportunity to do works in the summer holiday. That then makes it more difficult to deliver the works without disruption to the school and creates some risk that you don't complete enough work by the grant funding deadline, which is always the end of the financial year, to ensure you claim the full grant. That is why in this report we're proposing skipping the outline business case stage and moving straight into developing investment grade proposals as soon as the grant funding is confirmed. That does mean that the council's taking the investment grade proposal fee at risk. It's around £1,000 per school typically. And if the school should decide not to proceed to installation works, then that is a fee that the council would be incurring. Otherwise, it will be passed on to the school as part of the normal project costs. As with any other construction work, we found that rising material and labour costs have been a big challenge across the programme. We've found that to make the phase 3A projects, the first 4 that have now been agreed by schools, to make those viable, we've had to strip out some of the risk factors and the costs of providing a guarantee on operational energy savings. We've also found that the business cases are incredibly sensitive to energy prices, which we know are incredibly volatile. So when we present the business cases to schools, we're providing a sensitivity analysis to show that volatility, but it is a difficult one to manage, really. And we've also found that in some cases, constraints on how much electricity grid connection upgrade you can obtain prevent complete decarbonisation of heating. So we've had one project where to meet peak demand, we'd have had to pay for a new substation at more than £100,000 in addition to the project costs. So we have unfortunately had to have a peaking gas boiler installed on one project. Other projects so far are largely proceeding just with air source heat pumps and thermal buffering to smooth out peaks in demand. And last section I wanted to just mention was lessons learned from installation. We have found installation work on the first 3 projects very challenging. They've overrun by around 7 months. First one is almost complete, but still subject to delays on some component deliveries, impacted by global chip shortages, essentially. And the other 2 are likely to complete, one by the end of this year and one by February next year. As I say, factors behind that, material lead times are a key factor. Limited supply chain capacity for installers has also been challenging, and booking in installers at suitable times has been very difficult. Often the contractors have had to change their subcontractors 2 or 3 times in order to secure an appropriate installation slot. And there have been some errors in assessing the electrical connection upgrade requirements that were necessary on site. So we have drafted a procedure to work through with our contractors on that to ensure that they fully assess that at the outset of the projects to prevent a recurrence of that. I think those are the key points I wanted to make. Well, happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, do you have any questions for Chris? Councillor Corney.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for the report. The 3B, just a simple one really. Obviously applications went in yesterday. Do we have a date when we expect that to be announced, whether we're successful or not? And a second, if I may, it's 2.5.3. We have spoken about this before, about if a heating system fails prior to the the upgrade being sort of carried out. By installing a new boiler, that obviously takes that out of the equation. We've spoke about the hiring in of a temporary boiler. I don't know, I raised it previously about looking at maybe something that we've taken out that could be adapted, and rather than hiring them in, whether it's something we could do from in-house to save what's a considerable amount of money, really, isn't it? 30 to 120,000. Thank you.
On the first question, I think Salix, the grant funding body, have said that they're expecting to announce results in November. However, the launch of the competition was delayed, and previously it's been kind of late December, early January before we've heard results. So I think that's probably the most likely timescale this time. The challenge of how to manage boilers that fail before we are able to put a program in place to install air source heat pumps is a really difficult one, and I don't have a solution to it at the moment. I think I'm not sure that a lot of the cost is in the installation rather than in the equipment, and I'm not sure that taking boilers out and reinstalling them elsewhere is necessarily going to be an optimal solution. I think there's probably work we can do with Education Capital colleagues to look at whether there's some sort of framework arrangement we can put in place for provision of temporary boilers, or possibly even retaining a small capacity of our own temporary boilers to install where an unexpected failure takes place. In principle, one of the elements that was agreed by committee last year was that we could build up a surplus of monetized carbon savings from the programme and use that to subsidise weaker business cases. Potentially that could be one source of covering the costs of either temporary boiler provision or installation of a used boiler as a temporary measure to cover a failed boiler until such time as an air source heat pump program can be put in place. So a bit of a long-winded answer to say more work required, I think, on that one, to be honest with you.
Very briefly, Councillor Corney.
And you know, thank you. And I know it's probably a trivial thing, but just the way that's worded, it makes that sound like that funding is purely for hiring. So I completely understand what you're saying about the cost being the actual, probably the installation, but probably just a little bit misleading, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. Is there anybody who feels the need to say anything about this report? Any contributions to debate? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just very glad to see that attention is being paid to the noise impact of air source heat pumps, and that in future we are asking contractors to ensure that low noise units are specified, because I think this is something that can be of concern as they come into function. So absolutely, I'm very pleased to see that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I would agree with that, having been somewhat involved in the issues at Larkfield with the noise there. I'm not seeing anybody else wishing to speak, so can I move to the recommendations on this then, please, which are to note the experience with the school's low carbon heating programme to date and agree going straight to investment grade proposal development as soon as grant funding has been confirmed. Can I see those in favour of those recommendations, please? Thank you. Again, I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chris, and the Energy team for all your ongoing work on this. It's just brilliant to see happening. So thank you very much indeed. I'm aware that we need in 20 minutes to take a break, but I am very much hoping that we can deal with the next item sufficiently before we do so. So I'm going to ask Emily Bolton, Climate Crisis Strategy Manager, and Phil, who is with us also, to present this report. Thank you.
Hi, yes, thank you. So this report bringing to you a draft interim corporate tree and woodland strategy for the council's corporate assets. So just by way of a little bit of background, so I'm sure as many of you are aware, there is significant government and local ambition around planting trees to deliver the multiple benefits that they bring across climate, the biodiversity and the environment more generally, flood mitigation, and through to health and well-being. And so in light of this, when we pulled together the Climate Change and Environment Strategies Action Plan, we incorporated an action within that to look at our trees and develop a strategy for how we can better improve our council tree assets. So this strategy is very much focusing on county council land and county council trees, rather than Cambridgeshire as a whole, at least for the moment. And it's really very much about ensuring we're leading the way in expanding and protecting the tree and hedgerow assets on our estates. So this being an interim strategy, it does reflect on our current understanding of our trees across our diverse portfolios. So that's picking up everything from trees around our built assets, through to schools trees, highways trees, trees on our rural estate, and also picks up on the limitations of that knowledge and understanding, and sets out the principles by which we will look to increase canopy cover across portfolio as a whole. It introduces 3 key principles. The first is that of the right tree in the right place. And this is very much about acknowledging that actually trees aren't appropriate in all locations, and we do need to recognize that in how we go about tree planting. And so we need to make sure when we're designing schemes, we are considering really the purpose, why we are planting them, the ecology, the location, heritage, and indeed, where necessary, the accessibility, if that's a route we're looking to go down as well, to inform those planting decisions. Second is really changing how we think about trees at the county and considering them as functional assets. So I think it's not always the case, but a lot of the time, trees and hedgerows are considered aesthetic, nice to have additions, rather than as functional assets that can actually help us deliver our core services. And in terms of, for example, managing air quality, managing flood risk. And so if we change how we think about our trees and maximize those and really acknowledge those benefits that they can bring us in our service delivery, we can think about including those in our business cases, in our justifications for the work we do, and therefore it also helps us with mobilizing finance for delivery of such schemes. And finally, we've also introduced a tree management policy, which we currently don't have a single corporate position on how we want to manage our trees across the county council's assets. And so indeed, what this is going to do is to hopefully provide some transparency on how we go about doing this, and indeed how we will or will not manage our trees in response to both service delivery needs, but also in response to queries from our residents. On top of this, we anticipate that different services may have more complex or intricate needs that would then layer on top, but this tree policy is our starting position. As an interim strategy, this is also including an action plan, which has very much a specific focus on improving our understanding of our trees, to develop a baseline from which we can then set future ambitious targets. These targets would come forward in a full strategy in about a year's time. And at 2.8 in the paper, there's a rough timeline for what we anticipate the next steps will be from the point of this interim strategy. I'd also like to note that early in the year, we submitted an application to the Forestry Commission's Woodland Creation Accelerator Fund to secure funding for additional officer resource to support delivery of both this strategy, but also to develop planting schemes more broadly across the Cambridgeshire area, working with our district partners. And we're pleased to say that we found out this morning that we've secured £300,000 over the next 2-year period to deliver that. So we will hopefully be having some resource as well coming in to support this strategy and the future strategies thereafter. Thank you.
Brilliant breaking news. Thank you very much indeed, Emily. So do members have any questions either for Emily Bolton or for Phil Clark, please? Yes, Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. So two questions, if I may. The first one is around, the thing is really important to get the residents and the public as involved in this as possible, but there are some barriers to that. So my question is just really what research in the long term and what strategies are you going to include into this strategy to remove some of those barriers? So one example is a license for planting trees. So I've had a couple of residents get in touch with me recently to say that they have applied for permission to plant a tree locally and have been told that if it's a yes, they have to pay, I think it's something like £125, but if it's a no, they don't have to pay. So I don't quite understand why, if the work has been done to decide whether a tree can be planted, why they would then have to then pay this fee for a yes answer. And it's barriers like that which are stopping people from being able to get involved and plant trees. It could also reduce the council's costs, particularly if the community are willing to fund the trees, but then are being put off by the extra £125 or whatever it is. So question is just kind of what are we going to be doing as a council to remove those barriers as part of this strategy? And the second question is, it mentions right tree in the right place. Absolutely agree with that. And we all know that from years and years and years ago, there are lots of wrong trees in the wrong places, particularly when it's close to properties and where that's causing damage to drainage, houses needing to be underpinned and things like that. So it's good to see that there's a list of criteria in this strategy as to what residents need to do in order to then get that resolved. But in a lot of cases, because the list of requirements are quite resource intensive and could be quite costly to a resident to then try and undertake, such as a root analysis, subsoil types and all of that kind of thing. Is there any way that we can support residents in achieving all of those reports that the council then needs in order to take action? I've got an elderly resident who's contacted me a few days ago. Her insurance company isn't being very helpful towards her. She's got lots of damage. Water's coming up for her toilets, it's root damage from an inappropriate tree, and the local residents basically just they don't want to lose trees, but they like these trees to be replaced with more suitable species, perhaps a little bit further away from the property. So what can we do in the long term to support residents with that as well? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll take that question, or two questions. So initially, the right tree in the right place. So can I just clarify, actually, so people applied to plant trees, was that through the district council or through the county?
No, this is county, because county land.
Okay, right, so I'm not aware of that, but that's the whole point of having the strategy and being able to have resources in place to work with communities, because one of the main things is obviously we'll be working through organisations, farmers, landowners to plant trees, but we also want the community to be involved. We want the community to take ownership of some local tree planting. So by having the extra resource that we'll now get through that grant, that's a revenue grant. It's an actual grant for carrying out the planting, but it's necessary to pull all of these issues, these barriers together so that we can fully understand them and then come up with an implementation plan. So there's obviously some areas that I'm not fully understanding of, but that process, that funding will help us to understand that and hopefully overcome those barriers and understand why we're charging £120, was it, to get permission to plant a tree. That may be on a highways. I don't know. I don't need to find out more to understand that, so that we can identify how we overcome barriers. And the right tree in the right place. Yeah, I mean there are lots of factors: soil type, planting near power lines, just sort of forward thinking about issues that might come up in the future, so that we don't incur a cost, so that householders don't incur a cost. And I think hopefully through this we can provide, because we will be working with tree officers at district councils as well. So this will help fine tune some of the advice we give them to hopefully overcome some of these problems. But it's also there to avoid issues where, for example, on the nature reserves that I manage, where we have people move into a house and then say, can we clear all the trees because I'm fed up of all the leaves and the seeds blowing into my garden? Well, it's like, you know, surely the interest was to have a house next to a nature reserve. So it is to try and clarify that and understanding and put some guidance out, which we haven't been able to do in the past, but this extra resource with the strategy hopefully will help with that. So does that sort of not fully answer your questions, but partially?
Thank you very much indeed. I've got 3 members wishing to ask questions. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think everyone supports more trees and recognises the value of having more trees in an area where people live. But there are some issues which are raised by that. So probably the 3rd or 4th most common piece of casework I get as a local councillor is complaints about trees, both on private property and in public authority land. And that will always be something like not regular enough maintenance, not maintenance to the standard that the residents expect, not quick enough dealing with issues like storm damage, with the refuse that trees drop, leaves accumulating in places that cause problems, and the sickness of the trees not being dealt with quickly enough. You know the sort of issues I mean. And what concerns me is it's great to put in a policy like this, but you've really got to be expansive in your forward view as to how you're then going to manage the new trees and when they grow, because it don't go away. It's a problem that will always be there, and if we don't manage it, it causes ongoing problems for everyone. And what worries me is that in the rush to do something great, we don't be honest with ourselves about how much resource is really needed to get. I mean, it's an easy thing to cut when times get hard, isn't it? A few less pruning of trees, a little bit less cutting of verges. It's an easy thing to cut. And that's what concerns me, because they do cause issues in lots of different ways. And I also wouldn't want to just palm it off onto the district councils, a lot of whom don't even have specialist tree officers anymore. They buy in expertise for certain circumstances. So I just want to make absolutely sure that realistic consideration is given to what will be needed down the line. Thank you.
So in terms of any new planting we do, I would say that's definitely one of the key considerations we have to incorporate. I think it's fair comment that perhaps that ongoing maintenance piece hasn't been adequately assessed ahead of time. In terms of those trees that are already in place, I think there is potentially a piece of work we need to look at now that we've got a policy and strategy in place that outlines what we will do. We need to now focus in on the how part as a result.
Thank you. Councillor Hathorn.
So it was a great read. It was really accessible, which is so important. You know, lots of these documents aren't, so I really liked it. Looking at the timetable, next year there'll be a full corporate strategy. Although I really liked it, I do have a 1.5 pages of comments I'd like to make. Now might not be the best place. Is there going to be a workshop for members before the full corporate strategy so we can be more involved in it? Because I think already the comments from members have sort of reflected that there are points that we come across that we want at least to be considered within the strategy. And the second question is, as part of the climate emergency strategy, we've said we're going to get the whole county to net zero, and we've taken on a leadership role. And whilst this is a corporate strategy, and there were some sort of hints in the introduction that there would be a wider strategy, that doesn't seem to be in the timetable. I do think it's really important, because I've looked at the district, my local district council, and they don't have a tree strategy. I've looked at Natural Cambridgeshire and I couldn't see that they had a tree strategy. And the government strategy, you know, is quite similar, but there's local issues here. And I've seen there's a group locally who are starting a nature reserve, which is a wonderful thing, but I see them absolutely paralysed by inaction because they don't know what to do with trees in certain ways. And, you know, just a little bit of leadership here, I think, could really, really support our communities in delivering things really well.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we would very much like to have a workshop with all of this committee or with members to explain what it's all about, and then we propose to take it forward. So maybe that's something we can have a think about and arrange, because it's also in line with the biodiversity strategy that we're in the process of getting tenders for. And so it will sit alongside that, and that's like a partner document. So what we say in that needs to sort of correspond what we're saying in this document. And yes, biodiversity strategy will be about working with communities, so community-led nature partnerships, which we have some just transition funding for, and that's a project that we're developing at the moment. So all of what you say involving communities is very important, and we're very aware of it, and yes, it's something that we want to do. Know that we at this stage, that's something we can perhaps take some sort of comments from yourself, and I'll welcome your comments, whatever you've got. That'll be really useful, because then we can find the strategy that we're talking about now ready for sort of full adoption next year. And the reason it is only interim, just to sort of back up what Emily was saying, is that one of the sort of actions within that was to have a target for how many trees we would plant, but we don't have a baseline. So once we have a baseline, we can come back to you next summer, autumn, whenever it is, say, this is our baseline, this is the percentage tree cover we have on county council owned land, and this is a target for, we want to increase that by whatever percentage or whatever hectareage. And that's something we can then work through parish councils, local community groups. So that is, yes, that's very much in our mind. And this is just the first step in that process. And was there another question in there? I was thinking in terms of, I think there were 3 questions there.
No, I think there were sort of 2 questions, and then I sort of started talking. But in terms of my comments, should I just email them over? Is that the best?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Bradnam, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I just wanted to check with you. I appreciate this is about trees that are on our assets. I just wanted to point out that when you're talking about engaging with district councils and parish councils, that's very good, and I'm pleased that you are, but to be aware that many parishes, and in fact even district councils, don't necessarily own very much land which is suitable for tree planting. Some of them have a little around, certainly district councils often have a little around housing in their ownership, but very often the land, as you will appreciate, is actually highways land very often. And similarly, parishes don't necessarily have very much land. I myself am the tree warden for Milton, and when trying to find locations on which to plant trees as part of the Jubilee General Green Canopy and all of that, I actually had to hunt quite hard to find appropriate locations in my parish for trees to be planted. So what I have 2 other points, and that is, I wondered whether we've considered in our strategy providing some requirement for landowners, and I include in that ourselves, that when they, and I also mean in that private landowners, that when they have substantial land holdings on which the felling of trees would have a significant effect on a number of neighbours, whether there's any way to engage them in discussions with tree officers, either at their district council or at the county council, before they undertake felling. Now, from the sort of strategic point of view, often we know that when developers go into a site, the first thing that you're aware of is that they fell all the trees before they start. And I wondered if we could put something in to mean that developers or indeed landowners should reasonably engage with the authorities before that's done. I know it's, when you look at it, in essence, they're private landowners and they don't have to, but I wonder if we can look at that, because often the asset is gone before we even know it's in their ownership. And where it affects a significant number of neighbours, I think this is important, because in my own division, I'm aware of such a situation that's happened, and whilst those neighbours have no entitlement to the benefit of the trees behind their property, one wonders whether, given that this is a substantial area of land on which trees have been felled, it would be nice to think we might have some way of engaging with them first before they do that. And a second point, which is more specific, is with new plantings. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, when we're planting substantial sized trees in maybe urban locations, can we, and I'm thinking in terms of like highways, replacement trees and that sort of thing, can we, where it's reasonable and appropriate, can we ask that irrigation circles, irrigation rings are planted in the tree, are installed in the tree planting hole with an intention to maintain and water for the first year at least, because we know that we've had problems with establishment of trees because they haven't been managed well. And I appreciate we can't do that everywhere, but certainly in urban locations where there is kind of regular maintenance, could we ask for that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. Officers.
There's quite a lot there. I'm just trying to remember. So in terms of working with district councils, so yes, I recognise that some don't have tree officers, but as the planning authority and any work on TPOs or tree preservation orders, that would be dealt with through the districts. But then also remembering at the moment, this strategy is just looking at county council land assets. And I think it was Councillor Hathorn raised about the wider county strategy. So on advice from members and senior management, for now, we just wanted to get the county council strategy done. And then one of the things that we need to come back to you with is a proposal for doing a wider county strategy, which would have to be done in partnership with the district councils, because obviously they have their own tree strategies. And we want to make sure that we're not stepping on any toes, but what we're doing is complementary. So, and how we resource that, because that is a bigger piece of work, because at the moment, this strategy has been written by Emily and I off the side of our desk. So there's that also to take into account. And then the planning issue. So when developer submits a planning application, if it involves tree felling, that would and now should be covered by things like biodiversity net gain. And that's something that they would need to consult us on. Obviously, there are always unscrupulous developers that always go in, I won't say behind your back, but do tree felling without proper consultation. So again, through the planning process, we need to make sure that that's not happening as much as we can, though it is sort of slightly out of our control. Does that pick up on all your points?
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. Councillor Milnes is next.
Thank you, Judge. Actually, Councillor Bradnam touched on what I was going to ask, which was about the relationship with our hard-pressed local highways teams, who, for example, will finally get round to replacing the trees that they promised you several years ago. They plant them, they put the bags and the underground rings in place and make no provision for watering because they haven't got that resource. You know, particularly last year, where we had these cases, those poor planted out and quite substantial tree saplings, they're 15 feet high, and so are left to wither in the scorching heat. So I'm absolutely delighted to see you use this terms of trees as an asset. I think that's reflecting on their critical nature for us. So delighted, and I'd be interested to hear what you had in mind in terms of those practical issues that Councillor Bradnam talked about maintaining or establishing the trees until they can survive without that watering. Thank you.
Yes, so I mean, yes, I mean, the right tree in the right place at the right time as well, because yes, so if in urban planting, if we're planting a standard or a semi-standard tree, then we need to think about how we're going to water it, given the summer that we've had. And I've also heard from colleagues that everybody keeps calling this 1976 summer, and I remember that, but some people also, no, this is 75, because if you remember, that was a very dry winter. So we've got next year, the real 76 to come. And I know from experience where we've planted slightly larger trees that are struggling. And then it's when you come up with planting schemes, it's remembering how you're going to water them in the future, or at least for those first 2 years. But also, do we need a standard or a semi-standard tree when we could just plant a whip? Because if you're planting whips, they're much more resilient to drought because they've got less leaf. And sometimes they look as though they're dead, If you come back the next spring when we've had a wet winter, and you can do the scrape test where you scrape the bark, and if it's green underneath, it's still alive. So they're much more resilient and likely to take. So it's thinking about right tree in the right place and the right type of tree as well. So yeah, it's quite complex, but hopefully through this strategy, through engaging with others, we can hopefully tackle that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, thank you very much for an excellent report. Under 1.3 of the action plan, we say to provide greater transparency to residents on the council's approach to tree management. Because I get a lot of complaints like other councils do with regard to the way the trees are maintained, are we in that section going to provide residents with what maintenance we will do on our trees on our land, and how quickly we're going to do that maintenance? Because that is usually the question I get asked first. And at this point, you probably haven't, but have we done anything with regard to how much such a maintenance regime across the whole county will cost the county council?
So picking up on the first point, I think at the moment we're taking the tree management policy as our starting point. And this 1.3 action is very much about working out how we implement that in practical terms beyond just ensuring residents know in principle what it is we want to do. The costing piece is, I think, a next phase that we need to look at. And part of that does fall out of the baseline and the survey work that we want to do to really ensure that we understand the current status quo of our tree assets. So in some places we have far more information than others, and it's about pulling all of that together so we can then target which trees are perhaps going to need more maintenance than others, and really hone down that maintenance regime so that we're not over maintaining, because indeed that can be detrimental to trees, but also ensuring that we are keeping the trees in a good condition such that they don't have some of the cause some of the problems that you're referring to.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm not seeing any further questions. Is there any debate to be had on this proposal? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to move to the recommendations, and in doing so I just want to say how very pleased I am to see this interim strategy come forward. It's come already a long way from where we were and the position we were left, but we also as an authority have a long way to go to be in the place that we need to be, hence the interim nature of this strategy while we try to establish the baseline from which we can move forward, and that's really important to do. So the recommendations are to note the interim nature of the draft tree and woodland strategy, to note the increased level of ambition incorporated into the draft strategy, and to improve the draft interim tree and woodland strategy itself. So I'm looking to my Vice Chair to second that. Thank you very much. So can I put that to the vote, please? Can I see those in favour? Thank you very much. Can I see those against? And any abstentions? I think Councillor Tierney, you were a late hand in favour of, right, okay, so I think that we are unanimous on that. So thank you very much indeed, members. Thank you very much, Emily and Phil, for your hard work on this, and great to see it moving along in the way it is. So thank you. I want to apologise now to Dawn for having underestimated the level of interest there would be in this item. We are now running 10 minutes over the point at which I should have called a break. So I'm going to call a break now. It is 12:10 according to my calendar and my phone. And so I'm going to call for a 9-minute break and see you back here at 12:19, please. Thank you. Thank you very much, members. I'm going to call the meeting to order again. I said 12:19, it's now 12:20. So I'm going to move on to item 7, which is the business planning proposals for 2023 to 28, opening update and interview. Now, in the absence of Steve Cox, as we heard from the beginning of the meeting, I'm going to ask Emma Fitch to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report on pages 125 to 154 of your agenda pack outlines the process of setting a business plan and the financial strategy for 2023 to 2028, which will culminate at February's full council. This sets out the current financial position and estimates for 2023 to 2028, the principal risks, contingencies and implications facing the committee and the council's resources, and the process and next steps. As members will be aware, Chapter 4 provides an overview of the Engi revenue programme with the pressures and risks highlighted in paragraph 4.2 on page 133 of your agenda pack, and the savings and income proposals in paragraph 4.3 on page 134 of your agenda pack. Chapter 5 provides the overview of the Engi draft capital programme on page 134 of your agenda pack, which includes new schemes and changes to existing capital schemes. So with this in mind, committee is recommended to note the overview and context provided for the 2023 to 2028 business plan, note the initial estimates made for demand, inflationary and other pressures, and note the overview and estimates made for the updated capital programme. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. Does anybody have any questions for Emma on this report? No questions. So then I'll move it to the debate. Does anybody have anything they wish to say in the debate? No, thank you very much. So this is only one of the most important financial papers facing us for the next 5 years. However, there will be other options and opportunities, I'm sure, as things develop. So if there are no questions and no debate, this is very much an initial paper. We will see much more in the development of the council's finances and our business planning over the coming months. But for the moment, the recommendations are to note the overview and context for the 2023 to 28 business plan, to note the initial estimates made for demand, inflationary and other pressures, and to note the overview and estimates made for the updated capital programme. So I'd like to move that, and that's seconded. So can I move to the vote on that? Can I see those in favour of noting everything, please? Thank you. That is unanimous. So thank you very much indeed, members. And thank you, Emma. You got away lightly there. Item 8 then is the finance monitoring report. And I'm hoping, yes, we do indeed have Sarah Haywood with us on Zoom. Thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for joining us today. So can I ask you please to present your report to us?
Thank you, Chair. This is, excuse me, this is a finance monitoring report as at the end of August. On the revenue side, Place and Sustainability Directorate as a whole is forecasting an overspend of just over £500,000. For Engi Committee, the main areas of forecast variance are the waste and the energy projects. Waste is mainly due to backdated rent for a household recycling centre, and the energy projects is there have been some income some delays which have caused the income and the maintenance cost, both of them, to be pushed back. On the capital side, the Strategy and Resources Committee has now approved the 11.8 million capital environment. So this amount of capital budget has been wired from this financial year to next financial year to reflect the updated timelines. That was all I was going to say as an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Does anybody have any questions for Sarah on this report? Not seeing any. Does anybody have anything that they wish to say by way of debate? No, again, thank you very much indeed, members. So the recommendations are to review, note and comment on the report. We have, or maybe have not done so, but we are asked to review, note and comment. And so I'm going to check that that is seconded. Thank you very much, Councillor Gay, and move to the vote on that. Can I see those in favour? And that again is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members. So we move to item 9, which thank you very much, Sarah, I should have said. The item 9 is the committee agenda plan and appointments to outside bodies and internal advisory groups and panels. So I'm going to ask the Democratic Services Officer to update us on any changes to the published agenda or appointments. Dawn.
The only change I've got is the St Ives Park and Ride update, which was going to be coming to this meeting, has now been deferred to the December meeting.
Thank you very much indeed, Dawn. Is there any debate or comment on the forward agenda plan? No. Thank you very much indeed, Dawn. So are we happy with that, please? Yeah, when asked to note, yes. Those in favour of noting. Yeah, thank you. So as Dawn has just advised us, we have no need to exclude the press and public because the item which was to be taken in confidential session as item 11 on St Ives has needed to be deferred for more information. So with that, we close the meeting. So thank you very much indeed, members. And we will see you in December at this committee. Thank you. Thank you to officers as well for all your input.